The office was eerily quiet as the last remnants of sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows on the carpeted floor. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, finishing the final email of the day. The familiar hum of the computer fan was the only sound keeping me company, as my coworkers had long since departed. I was about to power down my computer when my phone vibrated against the desk. The name on the screen made me pause. Matthew, my husband. My heart swelled slightly, as it always did when I saw his name. After 10 years together, it was comforting to know that the sight of his name still sparked something inside me. "Hey, Matt," I answered, the weariness of the day melting away as I leaned back in my chair. "Just finishing up here. What's up?" His reply was anything but comforting. "We need to talk," he said, his voice sharp and unfamiliar. "Talk?" I repeated, straightening up. My smile faltered as the weight of his tone sank in. "I'm filing for divorce," he said bluntly, the words falling like a hammer. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. The office around me seemed to blur, the hum of the computer and the faint ticking of the clock fading into the background. Divorce? The word felt foreign on my tongue, something that belonged to other people, not us. "Matt, what are you saying? Why?" "I've made up my mind." He cut me off, his tone cold and resolute. "You'll hear from my lawyer soon." "Your lawyer?" My voice cracked, disbelief clouding my thoughts. "This isn't real." "Matt, please, can we talk about this? What happened? What changed?" "I don't want to talk about it," he said, his voice growing colder. "This is what I want. Goodbye, Lydia." And just like that, he hung up. For what felt like an eternity, I sat frozen in my chair, the phone still pressed to my ear long after the call had ended. The cold, detached tone of his voice echoed in my mind, replaying his words over and over. The office lights flickered, a faint reminder that it was time to leave. Mechanically, I gathered my things, my hands trembling as I slipped my phone into my bag. My mind was a cacophony of questions. How had it come to this? The drive home was a blur. I barely noticed the cars around me, the familiar streets that led me back to the house Matthew and I had shared for years. My chest felt tight, as though the air had thickened. When I walked through the front door, the house greeted me with an unsettling silence. The warmth that had once made this place a sanctuary now felt oppressive, its familiarity mocking me. Stepping into the house felt like walking into a stranger's life. The walls, adorned with photos of a smiling couple, felt like a mockery now. Every corner seemed to whisper memories of a life I thought was solid. The living room was just as we had left it the night before. A half-empty wine glass on the coffee table, the throw blanket still draped over the couch. I stood in the doorway, taking it all in as though it was the first time I'd ever truly seen it. This was supposed to be our haven, a space filled with laughter and love. How had it turned into a graveyard of what used to be? I dropped my bag on the floor and collapsed onto the couch, staring at the empty seat beside me. This was where Matt would usually sit, his hand lazily resting on mine as we talked about our day. I could almost hear his voice, feel the warmth of his presence. But the reality was stark. He wasn't coming back. The hours stretched into eternity as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling. My mind refused to rest, cycling through every interaction with Matthew over the past few months. Had there been signs I had missed? There were moments that stood out in hindsight, times when he had seemed distant, glued to his phone, or quick to brush off my attempts to connect. But wasn't that just life? People got busy, distracted. It didn't mean they were planning to walk away. A pang of doubt gripped me. What if this was my fault? Had I been too wrapped up in my work, too complacent in our routine? The questions came like waves, each one pulling me further into the depths of despair. By morning, my exhaustion had turned into something more resolute. I couldn't let this end without understanding why. Matthew had made his decision clear, but I wasn't going to let him walk away without giving me an explanation. I sat at the kitchen table, my coffee untouched, staring at my phone. Should I call him? No, he'd already said he didn't want to talk. My thoughts turned to his lawyer. If Matthew wouldn't talk to me, maybe I could get some clarity from the person orchestrating this nightmare. Later that day, the email came. It was from Matthew's lawyer, a man named Henry Baxter. The message was formal and clinical, outlining the steps for the divorce and requesting a meeting to discuss terms. I read it 3 times, each word feeling like a nail in the coffin of our marriage. The finality of it all was suffocating, but beneath the shock was a spark of determination. If Matthew thought he could leave me blindsided, he was wrong. The day of the meeting arrived too quickly. My stomach churned as I walked into the law office, my heels clicking against the polished floor. The receptionist greeted me with a rehearsed smile and directed me to a conference room. Henry was already there, seated behind a large wooden desk, a stack of papers in front of him. He looked up as I entered, his expression neutral but tinged with unease. "Mrs. Carter," he said, standing to shake my hand, "please have a seat." I sat down, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. "Thank you," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. Henry wasted no time diving into the logistics. His words were measured, professional, and entirely devoid of the empathy I craved. "Matthew has outlined his terms," he began, sliding a document across the table. "He's hoping for an amicable resolution." I glanced at the paper, the legal jargon blurring together as my mind raced. "Why?" I asked suddenly, interrupting his practiced speech. "Why is he doing this?" Henry hesitated, his gaze dropping to the papers in front of him. "I'm not at liberty to discuss personal matters," he said finally, but there was something in his tone, a flicker of discomfort, that caught my attention. Leaning forward, I kept my voice steady. "Mr. Baxter, I can tell you're a decent man. Whatever Matthew has told you, I deserve to know the truth. Please." For a moment, he looked torn. Then, with a sigh, he removed his glasses and rubbed his temples. "I shouldn't be telling you this," he muttered, "but you deserve to know." Henry's hesitation was brief, but it spoke volumes. He leaned back in his chair, his voice low and deliberate. "Your husband has been planning this for months. He's been strategic, to say the least." My heart sank as his words settled over me. "Strategic?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean?" He cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. "Matthew has been gathering financial records, setting up separate accounts. He's involved with someone else." The room seemed to tilt as the air rushed from my lungs. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "Someone else?" The words felt foreign, like they belonged in someone else's nightmare. Henry nodded, his gaze dropping to the stack of papers between us. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said anything, but I couldn't sit here and pretend this was just a mutual decision. You deserve to know." The drive home was a blur of emotions. Anger, sorrow, disbelief. How could Matthew do this? The man I trusted, the man I built a life with, had been plotting this behind my back. Every moment of the past year replayed in my mind, now tinged with suspicion. His late nights at work, the sudden business trips, the way he had grown distant. How had I been so blind? The house felt colder than ever. When I walked through the door, I sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the space where we used to share meals. The silence was deafening, but my thoughts were loud enough to fill the void. I needed answers, but more than that, I needed support. My best friend, Amanda, had always been my rock in difficult times. I grabbed my phone and dialed her number, my hands trembling as I waited for her to pick up. "Lydia?" Amanda's voice was warm, concerned. "Is everything okay?" "No," I said, my voice cracking. "Can you come over? I need to talk." Within an hour, Amanda was at my door, her arms already open for a hug. She didn't ask questions right away, giving me space to collect my thoughts. "I can't believe this is happening," I said finally, tears streaming down my face. "Matthew, he's been cheating on me, and he's planning to take everything." Amanda's expression shifted from concern to anger. "That bastard," she said, her voice trembling. "Lydia, we're not going to let him get away with this." Together, Amanda and I started digging through the evidence I had. Bank statements, emails, receipts, each one painting a clearer picture of Matthew's betrayal. "He's been transferring money to a separate account," I said, pointing to the transactions. "And look at this, charges for hotels and dinners. None of this was for us." Amanda leaned over the table, her brow furrowed. He's been planning this for a while. But you're not alone, Lydia. We're going to fight back. The next day, I reached out to a lawyer Amanda had recommended. Sarah Bennett was a no-nonsense professional with a reputation for being relentless in court. Sarah listened intently as I explained the situation, her pen moving swiftly across a notepad. "We'll need evidence," she said firmly. "The more, the better. If he's been siphoning funds or cheating, we can use that to protect your assets." Her confidence was reassuring, a beacon of hope in the chaos. "I'll do whatever it takes," I said, my voice steady for the first time in days. With Sarah's guidance, I hired a private investigator to dig deeper into Matthew's activities. Diane, a sharp-eyed woman with a calm demeanor, promised to uncover the truth. "You'll have what you need," she said, her voice steady. "But it might take some time. Be prepared for what I find. It's not always easy to see the full picture." The days that followed were excruciating. Each phone call, each email from Diane, felt like a lifeline or a noose. What would she find? Would it confirm my worst fears or reveal something even more devastating? Amanda stayed by my side, her presence a constant source of comfort. "Whatever happens, Lydia, you'll get through this," she said, her hand on mine. "You're stronger than you think." When Diane finally called, her voice was calm but tinged with urgency. "Lydia, I have what you need. Can you meet me?" I sat across from her in a small cafe as she laid out the evidence. Photos, receipts, documents that painted a picture of Matthew's betrayal. The proof was irrefutable. "He's been seeing her for over a year," Diane said quietly. "They've traveled together, stayed in hotels. It's all here." The anger that had simmered beneath the surface now boiled over. Matthew had underestimated me, but I wasn't going to let him take everything I had worked for. Armed with Diane's findings, I sat in my living room staring at the thick envelope of evidence she'd handed me. My hands trembled as I flipped through the photos. Matthew with her, smiling, walking hand in hand, sharing private moments that should have been ours. Amanda sat across from me, her eyes filled with fury. "This is it, Lydia. This is where you need to stand up to him." But the thought of confronting Matthew filled me with dread. "How do you face someone who's betrayed you so deeply?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Amanda leaned forward, her expression firm. "You can, and you will. This isn't just about Matthew anymore. It's about reclaiming your life." The next morning, I met with Sarah, my lawyer, and handed over Diane's report. She scanned the documents, her brow furrowing as she pieced together the timeline. "This changes everything," she said finally, setting the papers down. "Infidelity is a game-changer in divorce proceedings. This gives us leverage." Her words were a lifeline. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had some control. "What's the next step?" I asked, my resolve hardening. "We'll confront his lawyer with this evidence," Sarah explained. "But we'll do it on your terms. If Matthew thought he could blindside you, he's about to realize how wrong he was." The day of the confrontation arrived. I sat across from Matthew in the sterile conference room, my heart pounding as he avoided my gaze. His lawyer, Henry, looked as uncomfortable as I felt. Sarah, on the other hand, was calm and composed, her confidence filling the room. "We've uncovered some new information," Sarah began, sliding Diane's report across the table. Matthew's face paled as he glanced at the photos. His usual air of control faltered, and for a brief moment, I saw the guilt in his eyes. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice trembling. "You had me followed?" "You left me no choice," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. "You lied to me, to us, and now you're trying to take everything I've worked for." For the first time, the power dynamic shifted. Matthew, who had always been so sure of himself, looked vulnerable. Sarah pressed forward, outlining the legal implications of his actions. Henry glanced nervously at his client. "Matthew, we need to discuss this privately," he said, his tone urgent. But Matthew wasn't ready to back down. "This doesn't change anything," he said, his voice rising. "You can still sign the agreement." I met his gaze, unflinching. "No, Matthew, I won't. And you're not going to bully me into it." The meeting ended abruptly, with Henry pulling Matthew aside for damage control. As Sarah and I left the office, I felt a mix of emotions: relief, anger, and a growing sense of empowerment. "You handled that well," Sarah said as we walked to the car. "Matthew now knows he's losing control." Over the next few weeks, Sarah and I worked tirelessly to strengthen my case. With Diane's help, we uncovered more evidence of Matthew's deceit: hidden accounts, financial discrepancies, and lavish gifts purchased for his mistress. It was exhausting and emotionally draining, but I was driven by newfound determination. This wasn't just about protecting my assets. It was about reclaiming my sense of self. The next court hearing felt like a turning point. Sarah presented our case with meticulous detail, dismantling Matthew's arguments piece by piece. When the judge ruled in my favor, granting me the majority of our shared assets, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Life after the settlement was a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. The house, once a painful reminder of what I'd lost, now felt like a symbol of my resilience. I threw myself into work, rediscovering passions I had set aside during my marriage. Amanda encouraged me to take a woodworking class, and I found unexpected solace in creating something with my hands. One evening, as I was sanding the edges of a chair I'd built, my phone buzzed. It was Amanda, inviting me to a gallery opening downtown. "You need to get out, Lydia," she insisted. "You've been cooped up for too long." At the gallery, I found myself drawn to a quiet corner where a man stood admiring a painting. He turned and smiled, introducing himself as Ethan. Our conversation was easy, unforced. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of something I thought I'd lost: hope. Months turned into a year, and I found myself thriving in ways I never imagined. My woodworking hobby grew into a small business, and my circle of friends expanded with people who truly cared about me. Ethan and I took things slowly, building a connection based on trust and honesty. He wasn't filling a void. He was adding to a life I had rebuilt on my own terms. As I stood on the porch of my home one evening, watching the sunset in vibrant hues, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Matthew's betrayal had once seemed like the end of everything, but now it felt like the beginning of something far greater. I had reclaimed my life, and for the first time in years, I was truly living.